47 minutes. Not 45, rounded down for convenience, nor 50, rounded up to look generous. A strangely, deliberately specific number. And that exact number tells you way more about how this entire meeting went than almost anything anyone reportedly said inside the room itself. And that exact kind of precision is where the real story starts, because character rarely shows itself in the grand, dramatic moments everyone expects. Instead, it hides in the tiny logistical details that nobody bothers scripting in advance simply because they do not think anyone is paying attention. Page 6 reports that Meghan Markle felt deeply humiliated during Prince Harry's latest trip to the United Kingdom, calling the entire visit a total nightmare. This allegedly forced Meghan and the children to flee back to California much earlier than planned. Before breaking down those 47 minutes at Highgrove, we need to set the stage, because that brief encounter only makes sense once you see the chaotic week leading up to it. For nearly 7 years, a single narrative has carried the entire weight of the Sussex brand. They claim they fled because the royal institution was toxic and because of race-related concerns raised behind closed doors. They left to protect their family. And for a long time, that defense worked, mainly because it demanded total commitment. You simply could not brand the monarchy as toxic while simultaneously begging for a way back in. Yet, that is exactly what they did. Demands for privacy were paired with endless media blitzes, while bitter accusations of a toxic environment sat alongside public pleas for reconciliation. Individually, maybe you could explain those contradictions away. But piled up over years, they began to look less like personal growth and more like a desperate strategy hitting a dead end. Her husband suffered a massive defeat in court, and nobody wants to stand beside a loser. The entire trip became a harsh reality check. Harry has spent years insisting he could keep one foot inside the monarchy while living his own life. By early summer, the mounting pressure was impossible to ignore. The Spotify deal was dead, and Netflix was winding down, and major fashion brands were no longer calling the way they used to. Then came the devastating Daily Mail court defeat. 50 million attached to a 400-page judgment, with the judge stating plainly that the evidence just was not credible. According to those close to the situation, that perfect storm of pressure likely triggered some very specific, urgent thinking. He desperately needed the king and the royal household to signal, publicly or privately, that he still belonged. Whether that assessment is entirely accurate is hard to verify from the outside. But here is the detail observers kept circling back to. The one glaring thing that stood out above everything else. There was absolutely no sign of genuine self-reflection in any of their actions. But 47 minutes is not a real reconciliation. It is not a warm, happy family reunion. A self-aware person might have acknowledged that they made very specific choices. They openly attacked their family, and this isolation was simply the natural consequence of those actions. Instead, critics suggest their core belief never wavered that the palace somehow needed them more than they needed the palace. If you have ever seen anyone try to fix a broken relationship, you know the first step is never demanding forgiveness. It takes listening and humility. Critics argue that step never actually happened here. There is a vital point to make before we dissect the meeting itself, because it explains why this brief encounter carried such massive stakes for everyone involved. 7 years is a very long time to push one specific story without ever changing the script. And by now, all those glaring contradictions had spun into a whole new story of their own, one completely separate from whatever occurred at Highgrove. This was never just a casual family visit. We also know Harry and Meghan were kept waiting, driving in circles outside Highgrove for a significant amount of time, completely unsure if the meeting would even happen. This was ultimately a referendum on whether 7 years of relentless public complaints could survive direct contact with a monarchy that never fought back. So let us look at exactly what went down, because the raw logistics of this meeting tell a much bigger story than anything that was actually said in that room. No one knew for sure the visit was even happening until just hours before. That alone sent a massive message before anyone spoke. You do not control the terms here, we do. They quickly learned that royal privilege, does not just survive after you quit the job. It really doesn't. And that, I think, was the big reaction, not hostility, not hate from the British public. It was pure disinterest, and they probably despise that most of all because they crave attention. First came the driving. Reports say the car just circled around Highgrove for quite a while before anything actually got started. Maybe it was just basic security, nothing more. But for someone who built her whole brand around controlling her narrative and image, sitting in a car, circling in a state she does not run, waiting for others to decide when the clock starts well, that is a detail that hurts more than it should. Second, Harry reportedly walked inside entirely alone. Not as a couple, not together. The unspoken message was clear to many observers: we will speak with him, you wait outside. She reportedly waited outside with the kids during that whole stretch, which critics took as proof she was not part of the actual talk, present, but completely left out. Third, those 47 minutes specifically, not an hour, not even 45, rounded off, exactly 47. It was so precise, it felt like a strict business slot, not a warm family chat that just ran its course. No meals, no relaxed family vibe, no photos, just what insiders called strict protocol followed to the letter. It was closer to a formal state obligation than any kind of warm reunion. That Meghan and Harry are really only good for themselves and nobody else. Right now, they are in a nosedive, and like I said, some Emmy nod will not change that. It just will not matter what they do next because everyone has finally seen their act. Fourth, Camilla's presence. Palace sources say she had to be there. It was a demand, not a courtesy. She was in the room or the meeting was canceled entirely. Many saw that as a solid guardrail, a way to keep things completely honest. So no one made promises they could not actually keep. Looked at that way, the message is pretty clear. This was never treated as a private family matter. There is a big reason why that circling car detail hit so many observers so incredibly hard. And let's be honest about it. Control is the one thing she has fought to keep through every single scandal. Control over the spin, control over the news leaks, and control over which photos the public actually gets to lay eyes on. But sitting in a car with zero control, waiting on someone else's clock, that is more than just annoying. It completely flips the script on how they have run their entire post-royal life. That is probably why so many people locked onto a detail that seems almost too tiny to care about. 97 claims against the Daily Mail got thrown out entirely. Yes, because there was no real proof. And we all know suspicion is one thing. I have plenty of doubts about Harry and his staff. But doubts are not proof for a court. It is wild that lawyers walked away with 50 million here. Just crazy. If you are finding this breakdown useful, hitting that like button really helps us keep doing this exact kind of work instead of just repeating the same surface level headlines as everyone else. Stick around because what did not happen when that meeting wrapped up is where things get truly wild. Somewhere inside those 47 minutes, many observers believe a harsh reality finally became impossible to ignore. There was absolutely no way to spin this visit as any kind of win. No quick photo, nothing showing a real family truce. The quiet message was clear. As many saw it, we will talk once, but absolutely nothing shifts. You are still on the outside looking in, right where you have been for years, stripped of the royal sway you wanted back. When it wrapped, we got no hugging photos, no social media posts, and zero public celebration from either side. That cold silence told everyone this was a stiff business meeting, not some symbolic family healing. This was in their minds, Harry and Meghan's big redemption arc, their grand comeback to finally turn the tide. No more standing in the shadow of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. They were finally heading home, and everyone was supposed to be absolutely thrilled to see them. Then, commentators like Chris Shipp and Alison Hammond, the usual voices, worked hard to pump up this myth. But unfortunately for Meghan, the whole plan blew up in their faces. It felt like checking a box, not rebuilding a bridge. Most people instinctively understand how you are supposed to handle a rare opportunity like this. When you are offered a real chance to rebuild a connection after years of silence, you do not start with demands. You just listen. You show you are grateful to even be heard. Rebuilding broken trust in small steps instead of expecting everything to be fixed in a single afternoon. Critics argue that acknowledging where the palace actually stood, even slightly, would have meant owning up to personal mistakes as well. And that admission reportedly never came. Palace meetings almost never become massive public spectacles on their own. This one definitely did. Many commentators believe there was a desperate hope riding on that very public visibility. The idea was that just one photo with the king could shift the global narrative, spinning it back toward reconciliation and keeping them relevant. But no photo was released, and observers say it was not just about privacy. The goal was reportedly to keep the entire meeting strictly formal, preventing anyone from spinning the encounter into something far bigger than what actually happened inside that room. The other goal was simple: put Harry and Meghan back in their place, making it clear they no longer call the shots. And of course, it took only a few split seconds for that reality to be confirmed. Here is the brutal realization that observers believe became totally unavoidable in that exact moment. Whatever leverage she still believed she held was, by that point, completely and utterly gone. Without a photo, they had zero power to control the narrative afterward. No joint appearance meant no public proof of their restored standing. Lacking any public nod from the family, their dream of a dramatic comeback had absolutely nowhere left to go. We should really sit with that strict no photo decision, looking far beyond the obvious strategic games everyone immediately talks about. A single shared picture would have achieved what no press release or anonymous leak could ever dream of. It would have offered undeniable visual proof that the connection was still alive. No matter how anyone tried to spin the picture afterward, holding it back entirely was not just about privacy. It was a deliberate move to lock away the most valuable asset they had in this game. Clear visual proof. The one solid thing you cannot spin afterward, because it stands completely on its own, regardless of the gossip. That is likely why its absence felt so incredibly loud to anyone paying close attention to this royal drama. Then came a sharp contrast that royal watchers found almost impossible to ignore. While she was reportedly waiting outside Highgrove, William was busy attending a scheduled polo match, looking completely relaxed and comfortable in his royal role, needing absolutely no validation from the crowd. Catherine was seen around the exact same time, quietly handling normal duties, looking entirely natural to everyone watching, completely unforced and genuinely focused on the work itself rather than chasing the next big headline. For onlookers, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Working royals just got on with the job, never needing to prove anything, while she was left waiting outside, hoping for some small sign that the tide had turned. Supporters of William and Catherine frequently point out the exact same thing. They do not rely on staged photo ops to boost their public image. Decades of quiet, steady service do the heavy lifting, slowly building respect without needing a single flashy moment. Critics claim she never quite understood why that specific distinction is so incredibly important. To those critics, whenever things went wrong, her instinct was never to stop and genuinely reconsider. She never seemed to ask if she was wrong or needed to change. Instead, the focus reportedly stayed right on finding a better strategy, a stronger narrative, or that one perfect photo that might finally turn public opinion back in her favor. And many commentators make a related point that is really worth sitting with. Hard times do not actually create a person's character, they simply reveal what was already there. To those onlookers, those 47 minutes showed someone focused far more on strategy than genuine sincerity, more on managing public appearances than building real trust, and more on seeking validation than offering anything in return. Plenty of royal experts believe the palace's overall approach here was entirely deliberate rather than just being cruel, that it was fundamentally about drawing clear boundaries instead of trying to punish anyone. The unspoken message as they see it is that your actual role hasn't changed. This is not being framed as any kind of comeback, and nothing here should be seen as going beyond this one meeting. After that, public attention shifted toward changes made to the official royal website. Those updates quickly sparked a whole new round of debate about what they actually meant. Palace supporters argued the updated look simply reflected the honest reality. They simply are no longer working members of the royal family, and the website now accurately reflects that instead of this being some kind of symbolic punishment. To many close observers, the takeaway message was pretty straightforward. Their official status had genuinely changed, and the public-facing site finally caught up to reflect that. Some commentators compared the situation to Andrew while pointing out some very real critical differences. Andrew stepped back from royal duties after his own massive scandal and mostly stayed out of sight. Critics argue she chose a very different route, keeping up her public appearances and actively fighting the narrative around her situation, instead of quietly fading into the background. Looked at that way, the institution just kept rolling along, and many people took that as a broader reminder that massive, centuries-old institutions tend to survive no matter who happens to pass through them. For a person who built so much of her public brand around that royal connection, many observers saw these specific website edits as something far deeper than just a routine tech update. They felt highly symbolic, quiet and subtle, but signaling a deliberate choice to move on without ever looking back. Honestly, there is another side to that Emmy story we should talk about. Putting the criticism aside, a nomination, even for daytime, is a real professional win that most people in television never get to experience. So celebrating it is not at all unreasonable on its own merits. The real issue is not about the nomination itself. It is all about timing and perspective. Making a big deal out of a minor win looks strange when much bigger professional failures are piling up right behind you. Context changes how a victory looks, even if the accomplishment itself is completely real. Right around that time, the courtroom defeat started triggering its own separate wave of financial rumors. Huge legal bills, appeal costs, and messy insurance issues all start adding up fast after a loss of that scale. Then came Elton John's rumored comment, "I am not a bank, Harry," which critics took as pretty clear whatever informal safety net they used to rely on might not be there for them anymore. Insiders have pointed to a massive list of everyday costs well beyond those court fees, like high-tech security in Montecito, heavy property taxes, giant mortgage payments, and a full staff of nannies, personal assistants, and private managers. With their massive Netflix and Spotify deals gone, a lot of people are asking tough questions about their long-term financial survival. Some financial experts are giving them an 18 to 36-month window before the real money problems hit, assuming their spending stays right where it is without any fresh revenue coming in to balance the books. That kind of timeline, if it is even remotely accurate, will eventually force some incredibly tough decisions. The exact timeline here is worth paying attention to. First came the courtroom loss. Next came those website changes and the debate over their royal status. And right in the middle of all that money talk, they got hit with news of a daytime Emmy nomination. It wasn't primetime and Precision Matters here, but rather the daytime talk and game show bracket. Critics argue the internet hype over that nomination felt considerably louder than the actual achievement deserved, especially when contrasted with a brand built entirely on luxury and exclusivity. Right around then, Netflix confirmed they were dropping the show entirely. Industry watchers began pointing to a repeating pattern across several incidents rather than viewing each one alone. Take the fashion event, where she reportedly showed up late, reacted loudly when a model tripped, then walked out early. Then came reports she took far more credit than organizers felt she deserved, leaving the designer camp to mutter a blunt warning, "Never again." Other projects fell through, unnamed insiders labeled her difficult to direct, and major fashion magazines quietly cooled on future collaborations. This had industry watchers asking a tough question. Was this just a single misunderstanding or a troubling pattern unfolding across several different industries and professional relationships? To critics, the common thread is clear. Whenever a project fails to go exactly as planned, the response isn't self-reflection, but rather a fierce defense of the strategy and finding a slicker way to package it next time. Looking ahead, some royal experts are speculating about further administrative tweaks to how former working royals are handled officially, alongside questions about whether titles might eventually be stripped. Any such move depends entirely on cold, legal, and constitutional processes. Most observers consider it highly unlikely anytime soon. We must also clearly state that all of this sits firmly in the territory of pure speculation. Certain commentators suggest that relentless financial and media pressure might eventually fracture their relationship, believing that shared success unites a couple, while constant setbacks inevitably drive them apart. There's a structural reason why old institutions tend to win these quiet standoffs. Let's lay it bare. Before the final takeaway, any individual, no matter how famous or wealthy, remains just one voice, telling one story, dangerously vulnerable to a single bad day in court, one leaked private text, or a devastating headline hitting at the worst possible time. A crown with centuries of continuity behind it operates on an entirely different level. It never needs to win today's news cycle. It measures survival in decades, not weeks. That profound mismatch in time horizons, far more than any specific decision made at Highgrove, is the real reason these standoffs almost always end this way. What royal observers always return to is how the palace's master strategy was never actually about having a loud public fight. They didn't scream defenses or issue fiery clapbacks to every single headline thrown their way. Instead, they simply kept moving to their own steady, quiet rhythm. That is exactly how an institution built to survive generations is designed to run. William and Catherine played by the same rules, working inside the machinery. They let their royal duties speak for them, instead of constantly trying to micromanage how the public saw them. Those 47 minutes at Highgrove were never viewed by close observers as some warm, fuzzy family reunion. It played out as a stark demonstration of how an institution built to last centuries absorbs pressure without ever needing to raise its voice, without explaining a thing, and without doing anything other than quietly existing exactly as it always has. Out of this entire saga, that one specific number is what haunts me the most. 47 minutes. It wasn't some impulsive, emotional call or a natural conversation that just happened to run a bit long. It was a hard limit decided beforehand, strictly observed, and when the timer ran out, the room simply cleared. Sometimes the most revealing detail about a connection isn't what actually takes place while two people sit opposite each other. It is simply how long that door remains open before someone on the inside quietly decides to close it. And whether the person standing on the outside of that choice ever truly realized going in that the door was only ever going to stay open for the exact duration someone else had already decided.